Straight pull rifles are cool. They're unique, different than the typical bolt-action military rifle used prior to World War II. I've showed two Mannlicher rifles on this channel, an 8890 and a 95. They were both in rough condition, and the bolts just aren't very smooth. What is smooth, however, is my Swiss K11, which is a joy to shoot. Mannlichers and Swiss rifles are typically your choices if you want a milsurp straight pull, but there is one more. A Canadian Ross rifle. I've heard that these are very smooth, on par with the Swiss, so let's give it a try. I've never actually handled one of these before. And that is anything but. It's one of the two main issues with this rifle, other than the sporterization. But before I reveal the other, let's take a closer look at just what this is. This is, or was, a Ross model 1905, also known as a Mark II. The exact type is unknown. It's obviously been sporterized. There were a number of small incremental improvements within the Mark II designation, known as stars. I believe there's up to 5. I don't know exactly what this is, but I think that it's a 3-star due to the pattern of the rear sight. The 3-star rifles are probably the most common in the US, since about 20,000 of them were sold to the US as training rifles during World War I. Usually those are marked at the bottom of the wrist, but there's nothing here. On the side of the buttstock should be the model designation, the serial number, and the unit markings. So I should be able to pinpoint this rifle's exact history, but unfortunately there's nothing here. Either they were sanded away, or this is a replacement sporter stock. Unlike most rifles, the model and serial number aren't on the receiver. But what is here should be Ross Rifle Company, Quebec, Canada, 1905. I can only make out the last 2 letters in Canada, and 1905. The rest look to be ground away. Like I said, the rear sight is at least a 3-star pattern. Next to it is the rear handguard. This pattern, with the flat top, is from a 5-star, or maybe a 2-star. But all I know is that the 3-star should have a more stylized handguard that swoops up on either end. There should also be a front handguard covering the sides of the sight base, as well as forward, but it's missing. At the front, the stock has been cut back from the muzzle. The original middle band is gone, and a crude ring-shaped band slipped on. The stock looks like it was slimmed in this area. The barrel only measures 24 inches. It should be 28, so it's been cut down. The front sight does look original, however, so it was moved back when the barrel was cut. At the rear, the butt plate looks original as well. But like I said, this is either a replacement stock or had been sanded down significantly to remove the plethora of markings. The fit on the butt plate does look good though, so I'm leaning towards this being a replacement. Maybe one made in a sporter configuration rather than a cut down military stock, though it doesn't have any of the embellishments that sporter stocks typically have, such as a higher cheek rest or wrist checkering. The Ross Mark II is also known for its unique magazine. It's a long lever with a button that should be here. When pressed down, the follower drops and allows rounds to essentially be thrown into the action, similar to a crag. Then when released, the rounds should orient themselves properly. But I can't test that now, because it's missing, probably due to the sporterization, or maybe it's a hint towards another issue with this rifle. And let's get to that right now. You saw at the top of this video that the bolt was extremely stiff. There's no way it's supposed to be like this. You also saw the ground down other side of the receiver. Was it to remove the markings? No, probably to repair damage. The bolt takes a lot of force to open. I have the stock braced against a piece of wood, which is needed from this angle. The bolt travel is smoothest at the back, right about until here where it starts to bind, and bind hard. I'll remove the bolt. With a straight edge up against the receiver rail, I can see light at either end. Yes, the receiver looks bent, or this side has been crushed inwards. In a rifle known for tight tolerances like the Ross, that makes this junk. But that's not the only issue. I'm used to bores being in poor condition, but not this. Let's go to the other end. There's just nothing there, not even a hint of rifling. There's also no rust to be cleaned out, or pitting left behind. The marks that you see, I think they're tool marks. And it's easier to see into than it should be, because this doesn't measure 303, instead it measures around 4/10 of an inch. The bullet test is a complete fail, swallowing the cartridge up past the shoulder. At the other end, the 303 dummy fits, but it's very loose. So I'm not sure what this is. The only thing I can think of is maybe a 410 shotgun. I've seen a few examples of Rosses converted to 410, and maybe that makes sense here with the barrel measurements, as well as the removal of the magazine. But for my goal of restoring this to the original configuration, which includes firing the original 303 cartridge, that means that this barrel is also junk. So that's why I searched around and eventually found this, a stripped down barreled action for a 1905 Mark II Ross. And while I'm showing off new parts, I also found a magazine follower, complete with the arm and the press button. There is one more functional part missing, a magazine cutoff, but I don't think that it's needed to make this work, which is fine because I wasn't able to find it anywhere. What I'll do here is strip all the parts off of the rifle and then swap them over to this barreled action. Parts interchangeability is a concern due to the amount of incremental changes made to these rifles, so hopefully everything fits. Right off the bat, you can see that this barrel was also cut down to 24 inches. The front sight base was also moved back, though the front sight itself is different, along with the method of retention. More importantly though, this bore doesn't swallow the bullet. This dummy is actually made with a 308 diameter bullet, which is why it's going in as far as it is. I bet with a proper 311 bullet, a lot more of it would be showing. I'll clean up the board to see just what I'm working with. I'll start with solvent and a brush. Then follow up with patches. This doesn't seem to be very dirty at all. Looking inside, this bore actually has rifling, which is a major improvement. It's actually very strong throughout, so this will work just fine. I didn't even need the light to see inside. Continuing on, here we have the proper receiver markings. Ross Rifle Company, Quebec, Canada, 1905. And at the bottom it simply says patented. But like I said, parts interchangeability is a concern. My biggest worry is whether the bolt fits or not. I'm setting up a pipe vise in order to hold the barrel securely. Then I can test the bolt in the action. The bolt head needs to be extended just like a Mannlicher bolt. I don't have the bolt stop installed, which goes here, so I'll have to be careful to not pull the bolt out the back. And that's smooth. Much improved over this bolt in the other action. And it feels as smooth as the Swiss K11. Definitely an improvement over the Mannlichers. With that, I can remove the bolt, the head of which retracts back, and then prepare to disassemble the rifle in order to swap the parts over to this action. In order to remove the rear sight, I'll put the barreled action in the vise. The rear sight base is loose, but it doesn't want to move back and forth, only up and down. I'll disassemble what I can, driving out the pin for the ladder. I'll be careful to catch the pin if it shoots out. Then I'll set that aside. The flat spring is dovetailed. I'll push it forward. That's the culprit. This is a pin inserted through the sight base and into the barrel. When I move the sight, it stays put. The new action has the same hole here, though it looks like it's plugged since it's nearly flush. The only way to remove this is to pull it upwards. I'll use 2 pliers at either end. And that did the job. You can see the hole for the pin in the barrel, and it just inside the rear sight base. It just pushes out easily now. Now with the rear sight removed, I'll flip it around to get to the front sight. Both actions have the same front sight base, but I want to swap the sight blades, which are clamped on by the screw at the front. But that's not coming out. Off camera, I tried both heat and croil, but it's not budging. I can feel a slight movement, both in the blade and the sight base. I'll try to drift it out. Now that I've gotten all the parts that I need off of the original barreled action, I'll start assembling them onto the new one. This front sight base has a separate piece clamping onto the sight blade, which comes right out. I'll need to open it up a bit more to fit. Then it slides right in and clamps down. Now onto the rear sight. I'll put it on over a thinner part of the barrel. And then push it back and into position. Then I'll add the screws and the spring. I'm not adding the pin that made this rear sight so hard to remove, since the hole for it looks plugged on this barrel. I could maybe have drilled it out, but these 2 screws should be enough to hold and align the rear sight. Now to add the ladder back, I'll position it and compress the spring with these pliers. And with another pair, I'll push in the cross pin, a little bit at a time. The 3-star rear sight is quite a complicated contraption. There's a ladder that flips up and down. The range markings are quite small, and there are a lot of them. The slider has a quick adjust, along with a fine adjustment knob at the top. There's a notch and a very small peep sight, which are also windage adjustable by a dial on the side. Altogether, it's very much a competition style of sight. And while I'm looking at the sight, I made sure that it's level, and I noticed that the front sight base is slightly canted to the left. It was probably soldered on like this when the barrel was shortened. For now, I can fix it by moving the front sight blade over. Then when I'm shooting, I can dial in the windage on the rear sight. Here's the follower. It fits into the stock like so. And the front pivots on this cross screw. Then it's able to be pushed down by this button, and also able to move up as the rounds are fed. Unfortunately, this didn't come with a spring, and it's near impossible to find. When I saw that it was a torsion spring, I immediately thought it went here, but it actually fits loosely into this well here. This is an AR-15 hammer spring, which I think will work. You can see that I've already started tinkering with it. The legs are what I'd call straight. Instead, they need to be at something like a 60-degree angle. In modifying this, I have two choices. I can wind it further, or unwind it so that the legs are in the correct position. The original spring only has one coil, and since it fits into a narrow slot, I'll try unwinding it. Here's the spring. The bent ends of the bottom legs butt up against the two front action screws, so it'll be positioned a bit more forward. I think that will prevent this from happening. Regardless, the spring is just sitting here, and it's able to freely move around in the mortise, which doesn't seem like the best design choice to me. I'll add the bottom metal. And then position the spring into its proper location. Now I can mate the action to the stock. I'll add on the handguard, which clips onto the barrel. Then the bolt stop, which fits into a slot at the back of the receiver. There's nothing to really secure it in, so I'll hold it as I drop the action onto the stock. With it fully seated, I'll make sure that the bolt stop is able to move freely. Then I can add the action screws that hold everything together. I'm now realizing why there's two front action screws. They fit on either side of the magazine follower, so that it can move freely in between them. Now with the bolt stop in, I can really test the action. And that won't get old. Now I can test the magazine. These are dummy rounds. With the follower pressed down, I can just throw them in. I'll start with 2. It doesn't seem to want to pick up the last round. You can see that the bolt is skipping over it. The magazine cutoff should be in this area, but I don't think it being missing is the issue. The follower doesn't seem to be pushing the round high enough. At the front, the follower is up all the way. The arm is contacting the bottom of the receiver. I'll revisit that in a moment, but for now, let me try all 5. Looks like they do take some care to fit in properly. I wonder if rim lock is much of a concern. Here all 4 of them fed flawlessly. Now to take a closer look at the follower, I'll need to disassemble the rifle in order to get to it. Here's the follower. The bottom of the arm is flat, but you can see that the follower isn't parallel to it. What I'll do is I'll try to bend it up slightly. This is where it contacts the receiver, so that the bend will need to be here. I'll hold it in the vise at that point. Then with pliers and a spacer block so as to not damage the follower, I'll carefully bend the arm. Just a little bit. I can always come back and bend it more if I need to. Then I'll put it all back together once more. Then I can test it once more, starting with 1 round. And that worked. So now to test with all 5. I'll be a little careful putting them in to make sure that they're stacked properly and to avoid rim lock. The last round needs to be pushed in. Maybe I actually bent the follower a bit too far up, but regardless, it fits in. And all 5 of them feed, chamber, and eject just fine. Like I said, working this action just won't ever get old. There is one more thing to check regarding the function, and that is the headspace. 303 British, being a rimmed round, headspaces off of the thickness of the rim. There's a lot of information and discussion out there, or maybe arguments, regarding the headspace on elite Enfield. With the huge number of them in the US surplus market, in varying condition and the easy availability of parts, they're much more often rebuilt. Some say it's unnecessary to check headspace on elite Enfield due to their oversized chambers and the relaxed headspace tolerances during wartime production. I don't know if I agree with that, and anyway, this is a Ross. The British set minimum headspace of 64 thousandths and a maximum of 74, but like I said, during wartime, this was raised to 84 thousandths. Here I added tape to build up the thickness of the rims, 1, 2, and 3 layers. The rim alone measures 60 thousandths. One layer of tape with a thickness of 65 thousandths will fully close unsurprisingly. And two at 70 thousandths. It will as well. Three at 75 thousandths. That will close too. Now to test 4 layers, measuring 80 thousandths. It's not closing all the way. You can see the gap at the back in between the bolt head and the bolt body. So while Headspace is within wartime tolerances of less than 84 thousandths, it's still more excessive than I'm typically used to. To minimize bolt thrust, as well as to ensure that the brass expands properly, I'll slide these thin O-rings down onto the cases. This will push the case back against the bolt face so that the brass can expand to fill the chamber. I can feel some resistance when fully closed, meaning that the O-ring is filling up the headspace. I'll add back on the extractor. And with the function checked, there's one last thing to do. I didn't remove the middle band from the old action. It's not original, and it was a loose fit on the stock anyway. A proper solution will take place at a later date, but for now, I need something to hold the front end of the stock. A hose clamp works just fine as a temporary solution. I'll snug it up. Now here's the rifle back together once more. It looks the same as when I started. Rest assured that will change in the future. But for now, I need to make sure that this shoots. Time to head to the range. This is commercial PPU ammo I'm shooting. I'll slide on the O-ring. I'll only start with 1 round. That worked. Let's take a look at the brass. With the rims aligned, you can see how far forward the shoulder was pushed on the fired brass. Now I'll try 2 rounds. Odd, that didn't eject, but the action is very satisfying to work fast. I'm sure with some practice I can load the magazine much faster, but for now I'm going slow to ensure that the rims don't lock up. If they do, the magazine lever makes it easy to fix without taking them out. Here you can see how I'm shooting. It's hitting low and to the right at 50 yards. I can adjust the sights, but for now I'll leave them where they are so that it groups in one spot. Here I'm adjusting the windage to move the grouping over. I'll also raise the elevation up some. That's because I loaded some rounds with cast bullets, and I want to differentiate the grouping. On some rifles, it's tricky to get cast bullets to feed correctly. This is no exception. You can see what happened to the bullet. Sometimes when I have issues with cast bullets not feeding, I'll put the bullet in the chamber and then push the back end on the case down into the magazine. The lever makes it easy to do so. Here's the target again. Not the best groups, but that's on me. I can tell apart the difference in the FMJ and the cast though. I'm happy with how the rifle functions, but I'm not done with it just yet. I'd like to return it to its original military configuration. Unfortunately, that's not possible, given that the barrel had been cut down, but that doesn't mean that I can't get it close. I'd like for this to look like a shortened or a tanker variation of the original Ross, mostly so it looks original at the first glance, but also able to fit a bayonet. The issue is that Ross parts are very hard to find, which is why I jumped on the cut-down barreled action instead of waiting for a full-length barrel. Ignoring the stock for now, the metal parts I'd need, the barrel bands, and the front sight hood are impossible to find. Until I find them, or figure out how to make them, that's it for this rifle. I will still shoot it as is, because it is a lot of fun, but for now, thanks for watching.